Hey everybody, welcome to Great Books, Big Ideas. My name's Jim. Thanks for joining me. I want to talk today about reading, the philosophy of reading. In this video lecture, I'm going to talk about why we read, at least in my opinion, with an emphasis on reading imaginative literature. And this builds on a tag video I did not so long ago, and I'll leave a link to that video in the show description. By imaginative literature, I'm talking about fiction, poetry, drama, and creative nonfiction. So what I'm about to say is really maybe preaching to the choir. And for others, maybe this is more of a pep talk. Maybe some of you never were very interested in reading and you have some curiosity about it. But anyway, I hope you'll derive some encouragement, some validation to make reading literature part of your daily routine. I've been a writer and a teacher of writing and literature for decades, and before any of that, when I was just a wee lad, I was a reader, a book lover. Reading is a pastime that has never let me down, and it's hard to imagine how barren my life would be without reading books. So let's have a go and dig into this topic. Why do we read? What's literature about? And how we might become better readers. Let's begin with some definitional questions. What makes literature a distinct kind of writing? And what does it communicate and how does it do that? Well, if we turn to the Oxford English Dictionary, the mother of all dictionaries in the English language, it opens its definition of literature like this. Literature is writing which has claim to consideration on the ground of beauty of form or emotional effect. Claim to consideration simply means it's worth thinking about. It has some kind of value. It's worthwhile. Let's start with not beauty of form, but emotional effect. We will loop back to beauty of form later. When we read literature, we go beyond the simple practicalities of day-to-day written discourse, which is more task-oriented or goal-directed. And I'm going to say something that may sound absurd to you. Literature has no point to it, aside maybe from seeking to entertain you at some level. Aside from that, there's no point to it. Now, of course, literature can and does convey some useful information about human personality, society, history, moral values, and whatnot. But that's not what makes it distinctive. There are other kinds of writing that do that too. So what is it about literature that's distinct? Well, literature primarily communicates emotional content, and I mean by that emotional content in the widest sense of the term. What it feels like to live, to suffer, to endure, to win, to lose, to love, to hate, to be born, to grow older, to die. That's what literature does. It engages in emotional effects. You don't read literature really for some ulterior motive. You experience literature. You get involved with the characters and the narrators. You identify with them or relate to them. You try to understand them. You're doing a lot of connecting on an emotional level with these characters, these voices. We read to feel something that makes us laugh or cry, something that makes us happy, nostalgic, bittersweet, suspenseful, excited, liberated, rapturous. Sometimes we read to be scared out of our wits. It's all about feeling. Anything to wake us up from the stupor of everyday life. Reading puts us in touch with our emotions. It gives us permission to identify and empathize with characters, to liberate our isolated selves and relate to other selves. Now, writers of literature are hyper aware of these emotional and meaningful experiences, and they portray emotional life in ways that other types of writing simply ignore or trivialize. For instance, when you read a scientific paper, you're not likely to gather anything from the paper about the author's feelings towards the subject matter, or what it feels like to be a scientist, or what it feels like to be studying this topic. That would be bad science. Science writing's purpose is to deliver facts and information and theoretical proofs. It doesn't worry about feelings so much. The same goes for business writing, professional writing, and many other types of nonfiction. These kinds of writing are more transactional. They give you something, some takeaway, right? Remember, literature doesn't really have a point other than to entertain. So literature invites you to participate in an experience, the experience that it is depicting on the page. And that's just a fundamentally different way of reading. And yet, sometimes this experience is difficult. Poems, short stories, novels, they can be difficult nuts to crack. And as a college teacher, I would pose a few questions to students on my first day of class. So feel free to play along with us. Was there anything you didn't like about the way literature was taught to you? I'm not really talking about the choice of books. I'm talking about what the teachers did with those books. What did you like or not like about the teaching methods? Did your experience of reading literature over many years of schooling make you want to read more or read less? So we would talk about this. Sometimes I'd have them write about it, and then we would talk. Write, pair, share, as we used to call it. Now, with some glorious exceptions from the lucky few students who had great teachers, the answers tended to be disheartening. Students would say things like, when I was little, I loved books. I loved reading. But then I got to middle school and high school, and it became a chore. We analyzed books to death. It got boring. I was busy with so many other studies. I hated writing papers about literature. I was told my interpretations were wrong. Things like that. And I heard these, year in, year out, they would say these things. It's no wonder people sometimes grow bitter when recalling their encounters with literature. And sadly, many people abandon the reading habit as soon as they leave school because they don't have to do it anymore. And they don't have these positive associations with reading that maybe they had when they were little children. And yet, the American poet William Carlos Williams said, people die every day for want of what's to be found in despised poems. What might we be missing when we don't read literature? Reading is a great way to explore imaginary worlds that can tell you something true about the world we live in. It sounds a little paradoxical. How can the imaginary world inform the real world? You're making something up and you're telling me something about what really is? It doesn't seem to compute. I don't know how to explain it, but it works. It does do that. I'm convinced of it. Reading is a way to explore, right? It has this capacity to remove you from yourself. It's a little bit like going on vacation. You get to see someplace new, and when you come back to your world, Maybe you're enriched by the experience. Sometimes it's just good to get away from yourself for a while, and books certainly serve that purpose. Reading literature permits you through a vicarious process of putting yourself in others' situations from a safe and private space to see and understand life with new clarity. So you put yourself in other situations, and you do it from the safety of your own living room, and then you can understand life in a new way with new clearness. Doesn't always happen, but it happens often enough that it makes it worthwhile. You'll think better. You'll think more clearly. You'll think more creatively. You'll see problems in a new light. You will have models to compare with your own life experiences. And all of this reading can be incredibly enriching. It can even be life-changing, especially when you come across the right book at the right time. This may be a good place to take a small detour and discuss attitudinal problems when it comes to reading literature. Some of this was the function of bad habits that maybe developed during schooling. Myth number one: you'll always be able to see yourself in the book. Nope, not going to happen. However, if you read with imagination, you are more likely to relate the experience on the page to your own life situation. That's not always easy. It takes some imagination and some intellectual curiosity and some effort and some patience, but it can be done. So the book isn't exactly a mirror, but in some sense you can see yourself in it. And if you're only seeking books that show people who fit your bill, like all your label tags, the number of books that you're going to be able to read is going to be quite small. So you better get used to reading books about people who are not like you. And it's a really healthy thing. Myth number two: you should read literature exclusively as a means of understanding the historical and social context it was written in. No. The problem here is not that you can't read that way or that you shouldn't read that way. I mean, you certainly are welcome to. It's just that this isn't why most people read literature in the first place. It's not a scholarly assignment. People read to be entertained and potentially to discover something about the world and themselves. So sure, social and historical context is important. I do not want to dismiss that, but it's just not essential to the enjoyment of literature. Maybe it's like icing on the cake, but the cake itself has to do with the story that you're reading, or the poem, the topic of the poem. So for example, you don't need to know much about ancient Greece to appreciate the story of the Odyssey. Does it help to have some context, social historical context? Yeah, it helps. It absolutely helps, which is why so many books put footnotes in or have introductions or afterwards. It helps, but it's not essential so long as you're an attentive reader and so long as you have an active imagination. If you can focus on what you're reading, and sometimes it's hard to not have the help of, the context, but it can be done. You can certainly appreciate it. Myth number three: there's only one correct interpretation of a literary text. Wrong. Reading is not a parlor game of decoding the secret message in the text or looking up the answer in a guidebook or Spark Notes. All art, including literature, has a degree of ambiguity baked into it. Good works of literature can sustain multiple interpretations. They work on several levels simultaneously, and different readers will see these levels variously at different times. We all have our own frame of reference and life experience that we bring to the table when we read something, right? So we're going to see it differently. But those interpretations are contained, as it were, in the book. It can hold up to those different readings. So I think the right answer would be that there are many plausible interpretations out there, and part of the fun of reading involves exploring the many meanings that a work can have. Just get used to the ambiguity. That's just the way it is with literature. It means many things all at the same time. And you don't have to understand all the interpretations. You can come back to a book later and discover a new interpretation of it, which is really all about the fun of rereading, something that I've been enjoying a lot lately. And then finally, myth number 4, this is like the flip side of myth number 3, there are no incorrect interpretations of a literary text. In other words, anything goes. Everyone's opinion is equally valid. This also is an error. Now, everyone is entitled to their own opinion about what they read. I'm not arguing that. But it doesn't mean that every opinion is on an equal footing. Opinions can be wrong, sometimes wildly wrong. It is possible to misread a book. I don't like using the phrasing right and wrong, actually. I'd substitute plausible and implausible, or feasible and infeasible. And what makes an interpretation plausible is that you can support your views with evidence from the book and reasonable arguments. If you can show us how you read this, how you got to this interpretation, and that chain of reasoning makes sense, well, then we can say, well, that's a valid way to read it. It may not be my preferred way to understand the book, but I can see and I can accept your reading. Okay, that's how that works. All right, now that we've dispelled some myths about reading, I'd like to share 4 essential qualities needed to become a better reader of literature. And here I'm just borrowing lock, stock, and barrel from Vladimir Nabokov, the author. All that's needed, he said, are 4 things: an imagination, a dictionary, memory, a good memory, so you can retain details and make references. And fourthly, some artistic sensibility so that you can appreciate the way the work was put together. That's it. Imagination, dictionary, memory, artistic sense. If you can master those abilities, you're going to be a great reader of literature. So let's talk a little bit about some of the creative energy and the imagination that goes into reading. So to get the most out of reading literature, you need to invest time, attention, and imaginative energy. You must become what I call a creative reader. Ralph Waldo Emerson says, one must be an inventor to read well. You have a creative reader who joins a creative writer on an imaginative journey. And you're like, as the reader, you're like the traveling partner with the writer. and you're going along for the ride, seeing what you can see. That takes imagination. This imaginative journey may not be for everybody. I mean, you're going to be on your own. This is your trip. And it's not always easy. And nobody can cultivate this field but you. You don't really have a tour guide. You may have doubts about your interpretations of what you're reading. You may get lost. But the open road is there for the taking, and it's an adventure. It offers you the chance to reconsider who you really are, what you're all about, why you're here. I know those things sound lofty, but reading literature really can make a difference that way. And what you find on this journey is partly, perhaps mostly, up to you. Certainly the author has a hand in that, because they are the one who are like giving you the journey to take. But what you see along the way is partly up to you. So open your eyes and read with imagination. Read creatively. It's a lot of fun. Now, when you take this imaginary journey, you can kind of go in two directions, outward or inward. So we'll talk about both. Both of these are means of discovery. Both are forms of play. And like we said before, there isn't really much point to literature, purpose-wise, other than to entertain. And as a result, many utilitarian readers view reading as a waste of time, something that's tedious. It's one of the most boring, useless things you could do. Something that you might only do out of idleness or laziness, or something only the rich can afford to do because they have plenty of leisure time. But I ask you to consider something that Oscar Wilde said in his preface to The Picture of Dorian Gray. And he said, "All art is quite useless." Wilde, who was an art for art's sake fan, was responding to the Victorian utilitarian and Philistine attitude toward art, that it has to, be morally improving, or it has to sort of do something. He said, no, art is quite useless. Art is not going to make you rich and famous. It's not going to save your soul. It's not going to feed the hungry. It's not going to protect you from terrorism. It's not going to save the whales. It's not going to stop global warming or change the fact that the president is awful. It's useless that way. And yet, I detect that there is irony behind Wilde's statement. Literature's very uselessness may be one of its greatest strengths, because it takes you, the reader, out of the day-to-day realm and into the realm of the imaginary and the emotional life, as opposed to the world of humdrum work and duty. And that's why I like to think of reading as a form of play. Playfulness. Play is disinterested pleasure, not uninterested pleasure, disinterested pleasure. It's an activity whose end is itself. We play because play is fun, and it's its own fun. It's its own fulfillment. It's not connected with your needs, your sustenance, or your survival. Or maybe it really is needed, but not for the obvious utilitarian reasons. As spiritual creatures, do we not need time to meditate, to contemplate, to reflect on life? And is not reading as a form of play a means to do that? Reading lets your mind roam, expand, and pretend. And I think that's really, really healthy. And something that's perhaps in short supply. So after all, maybe there is some use value to be found in reading. It's just different than other forms of writing. Consider what literary critic Kenneth Burke said. He said we can use literature as equipment for living. I love that phrase. Equipment for living. We look to literature for models of human conduct, behaviors, moral situations that we relate to and learn from. This, in effect, is a continuation of the play metaphor. Literature offers a world where you can imaginatively play out scenarios on the stage of your imagination and take away lessons or kernels of wisdom from that encounter. Now, this in no way means that literature always contains a moral to be discovered and taught. Some literature does that, no doubt. But in fact, most modern literature is not didactic. It is morally ambiguous. That being said, approaching literature from this equipment for living perspective can help us chart our way through life's decisions and transitions. So it's like maybe it's like a touchstone, right? You can sort of tap into it and kind of compare where you're at in your life with the lives that you're reading about on the page. We can also read to escape and discover. Did you ever just want to get outside of yourself for a while? Some people use drugs for that purpose, but why not read a book instead? It's a lot healthier. We sometimes read to escape the real world, to break the daily routine, to just take a vacation from ourselves. And a book becomes your passport to other worlds, civilizations, time periods, regions, cultures, races, ethnicities, genders, sexualities, and selves. It just takes you away. It gives you the opportunity to role play, to imagine being in different contexts, to literally to imagine being a different person. We learn to see as others see. We learn to think as others think. And this has all kinds of humane benefits. It opens your capacity for empathy, for compassion, for understanding, for acceptance of the richness and diversity of the human experience. It will make you a more tolerant person. And, ironically, for all this exposure to diversity, you can learn more about your own self, who you are, where you come from, what your values and beliefs are. And it might even change some of those values and beliefs. You might grow as a reader. You know, the writer Amy Tan said, writing and reading is an act of faith in discovering something new and interesting about life and the self. She said, to me, that's the mystery and the wonder of both life and fiction, the connection between two individuals who discover in the end that they are more the same than they are different. In his essay, The American Scholar, Ralph Waldo Emerson had this to say about the experience of reading. Quote, the best books impress us with the conviction that one nature wrote and the same reads. Different people who find a common nature in that encounter during the reading process. If you don't find life or people very interesting, if you are not curious about people, honestly, you probably will never learn to read well. But I guarantee that if you read literature with imagination, attentiveness, and a sense for the artistic, this will help you to understand human desires, motivations, and possibilities, and human limitations. It will expand your range. That's reading kind of outward to the other selves, but you can also read to explore the inner depths, your own self. And there's some overlap here, but I think the point will hold. So let's talk about this for a little bit. The 20th century Czech writer Franz Kafka wrote this. He said, "A book must be an axe to break the frozen sea inside us." So the book is a tool to free your pent-up emotions, to let loose and purge. Also, the author Sven Bierkertz, who wrote a very good book called The Gutenberg Elegies a number of years ago, claims that serious reading is a kind of deep sea diving that makes available to you a portable tool for accessing your inner depths. And here's a quote from Bierkertz. "We hold in our hands a way to cut against the momentum of the times. We can resist the skimming tendency and delve. We can restore, if only for a time, the vanishing assumption of coherence." Or how about this quote from the French novelist Marcel Proust? He had this to say about reading, quote, "In reality, every reader is, while he is reading, the reader of his own self. The writer's work is merely a kind of optical instrument which he offers to the reader to enable him to discern what without this book he would perhaps never have experienced in himself. And the recognition by the reader in his own self of what the book says is the proof of its veracity." So the book is like a lens, more so than a mirror. And when you read, we have to acknowledge that, like Sven Bierkert says, it's cutting against the times, the momentum of the times. It's one of the more solitary experiences you're likely to engage in, what with our cluttered, oversaturated world of electronic media and technology. Reading is not life in the fast lane. You must make time for reading, and it takes time and privacy to do it properly. Herein lies perhaps the greatest challenge we face as readers today. There are so many demands on our time. Who has the time for reading literature? Why might you want to make the time for it? Well, one reason is, in my opinion, reading can become an act of resistance. It is antithetical to the fast-paced and purpose-driven habits of modern life. It is you doing something that says, no, 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 I'm not doing that. I'm going to do something different, something that's more sustaining, something that's less ephemeral, less shallow, something deeper. And you perform this imaginative exchange while reading silently, which is also a total resistance to the kind of bubble-driven, always-on, 24/7 culture that we live in. You have to check out for a while when you read a book. And if you do that, you might find that reading helps you to cling to your sanity in a world that has stopped making sense. So as isolating as reading can be, as solitary of an activity as it is, it can actually improve your connections to other people. If you buy into what I was saying before, that reading helps you to expand your emotional range, it helps you to understand, empathize people who are not like you, that will transfer into your daily life too. We can also read for therapeutic reasons. Sometimes the escape and the playfulness that reading books affords can help you cope with life, help you endure life's burdens. The German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche said, "We have art in order not to die of the truth." Sometimes reality hurts too much. It's too much to bear. Because art appeals to a higher and deeper truth than the one that's bogging you down, maybe it can provide a kind of comfort. It all has to do with escape, with discovery, with play. This is a safe space, the reading world. And it allows you to work through your own feelings, your own traumas, in, I think, a healthy way and definitely a safe way. So there's absolutely nothing wrong with disengaging from the world, tuning out and plugging into a book for a while. It might be the thing that saves you. Okay, so we've been spending a lot of time talking about emotional effects, about why we read, what reading can do for you, etc. Let's now turn to the second half of the definition of literature, that it's worthy of consideration also for its beauty of form. It's time to figure out what that could possibly mean. Well, the branch of philosophy concerned with the study of art and beauty is called aesthetics. So I'd like you to think with your aesthetics cap on for a few minutes as we establish a few general features of what makes objects beautiful. Here's a thought experiment. It could be a writing journal exercise. Maybe you want to write some responses in your journal. The first step is to describe the most beautiful face you've ever seen. Then describe the most beautiful place you've ever seen. And then describe a piece of music that you consider to be beautiful. And after you spend some time thinking about that or writing about it, review your thoughts and ask yourself these questions. When you see a beautiful face, a beautiful painting, or you listen to a beautiful piece of music, how do you know they're beautiful? Beauty is in the eye of the beholder, right? And doesn't this imply that beauty is relative to the person seeing? Is there anything that beautiful objects have in common? They seem so different, and yet we use the word beautiful to describe them. Well, despite the differences and despite the fact that beauty, yes, is in the eye of the beholder, I do think there is something in the abstract that leads our minds to see beauty in various objects out there. And to unpack this, I think you need to think about the effect that these objects produce inside you. And the effect that I see all beautiful objects having inside me is that they all provide pleasure. They delight us. They create a sense of fulfillment, of well-being, wholeness. And this is obviously a big reason why we read literature, because it entertains us. We want it to be entertaining. We want it to be pleasurable. We want it to be a beautiful story. It's why we take vacations to the Grand Canyon or Hawaii, too. We want to see beautiful places. It's why we listen to music and decorate our homes with art. We want to surround ourselves with beautiful things because they give us pleasure. So when we speak of reading literature as appreciating the beauty of form, and that takes some artistic sense to be able to see that, we're talking about the pleasures of the text. So what entertains us has a lot to do with how the text is structured. its proportions, the relationships of the parts between the whole, the relationship between the elements. For example, form is what you talk about when you analyze narrative elements in a book, such as plot, setting, point of view, characterization, style, voice, tone, mood, and how these all are packaged together to contribute to whatever the themes are in the book. And we like to think about things as human beings. We look for patterns. We respond to that. We can see design, repetitions, contrast, ironies, movements, changes in structure. This is all something that you can tune yourself into when you read a book. But of course, literature is not merely form. It's paired with its dialectical partner, content. The content of a book can be thought of as its subject matter, like the story or the themes, the motifs, the issues it takes up. Content is, in other words, what the text is about, what it means, what it says, and form is about how the content is shaped in a pleasing way. So this understanding of aesthetics helps to explain why even disturbing content can be pleasurable to read. The book can be about like the most horrible, painful, depressing things on earth. Things that happen to people like death and grief and crime and infidelity, cruelty, anxiety, depression, loss, and disappointment. And yet we still read it. So good or bad, the content, aesthetically speaking, is neutral. What makes the aesthetic difference is the form it takes, what the writer does to shape that content. If the story is told well, no matter what the content is, it will be perceived by our mind's eye as pleasing, and we'll see some beauty in that. So the book's formal beauty appeals to your mind, while the content speaks to your emotional life. Now, once you develop an eye and an ear for this interplay between form and content, and once you start reading creatively as a habit, using your powers of imagination to escape, to dive deep and to work outward, and once you start using your artistic sensibility powers, I think you'll realize what a difference reading can make in your life. So give it a try. Commit yourself to reading a little more each day, and I'm sure you'll rediscover your love of books. Thanks for watching. If you enjoy content like this, hit the like button and become a subscriber, then ring the bell so you won't miss new episodes. I welcome your feedback in the comments section, or you can email me at the address in the show description. Thanks for watching. Happy reading to you all. Peace out. Bye-bye.